Tonight, MPs prepare to give their verdict on the government's controversial plans to limit jury trials. The Prime Minister braces for a significant backbench rebellion on the courts bill. So is the legislation a betrayal of ancient liberties or an essential measure to deliver justice to victims? Also tonight, HMS Dragon finally leaves Portsmouth to head to the Middle East. We clear up Reform's position on the war with Nigel Farage, and I'll be speaking to the Shadow Defence Secretary, James Cartlidge, about whether international law still matters to the Tories. As opposition parties ramp up the pressure on the government on fuel duty, Rachel Reeves warns petrol retailers against price gouging in the wake of the energy shock caused by the war. And as Emmanuel Macron posts a glossy video showcasing French military might in the Middle East, is the UK being shown up by our oldest rival? Delivering a certain je ne sais quoi tonight, our panel, James Starkey and Ellie Chance. They'll be with me for the next hour. It's Tuesday. I'm Ali Fortescue, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. You're watching the Politics Hub. Well, for the last week, we've been going all out on the impact of the Iran war. We are going to be breaking with that tonight to bring you these live scenes from the House of Commons, where MPs are voting on really significant and controversial legislation that critics claim will unravel a principle of law in this country that goes back over 800 years. Well, I'm pleased to say our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, joins me now. So, Sam, why has this been so controversial? Just remind us.
So this is an important moment, both because of the changes the government are trying to put through and also what it means for Keir Starmer. So it's a big moment. The pictures that you're looking at the moment are MPs in the middle of the voting process. There are a couple of votes tonight. This one is actually on a Tory amendment, and then we'll get the vote on the main legislation. It's called the Courts and Tribunal Bill. And what it's doing, the purpose of this bill, is to try and reduce the extraordinary backlog that has built up, not just because of COVID, but because of pressures on the court system more generally. The court system is one of those bits that's been quite squeezed over the last decade or so when it comes to funding, and Crown Courts in particular have seen a big increase. And so this government didn't in the manifesto suggest ways of addressing this, but subsequent that have come up with some pretty significant changes. And what they essentially want to do is limit and roll back jury trials. David Lammy, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Justice Secretary, has been spearheading these plans, and essentially what it would do is increase the number of trials that could be heard by magistrates, limit the ability of offenders to choose to be heard, have their case heard in a Crown Court with a jury, introduce a new type of court that would be just a single judge sitting to oversee some of the cases, and also limit defendants' right to appeal if they're unhappy with a magistrate's conclusion. So those are the most contentious bits. And what the government claim is that this will dramatically reduce the number of days that need to be sat in courts and thereby reduce the backlog. But there's a huge backlash. And the consequence for that, the whole legal profession, so much the legal profession have come out against this, and potentially a critical number of Keir Starmer's own MPs. So what we're really looking for tonight is the size of a rebellion. And that leads me to the second reason why we're focusing a lot on this evening, why this is a really important moment. And that's because, as I think any viewer of this programme knows, Keir Starmer's actually ended up in a bit of a rut politically. But the particular reason is there's a question about whether he can get difficult stuff through the Commons. And since all of that flared up with last year's welfare vote and other things in the Commons actually connected to something we're about to talk about, Peter Mandelson, it's been a question, can he do difficult stuff despite that huge majority that he was elected on in the summer of 2024? Has he got enough of his own troops on his own side? So this is a test of political strength. Now, ultimately, Ali, I don't want to spoil your excitement, but in the end, a complicated picture is likely to emerge where some Labour rebels vote against this bill, some abstain. We are under no circumstances expecting the government to be defeated in tonight's legislation. That does not, by any stretch of the imagination, mean that they are out of the woods. The scale not only of the rebellion, but also of the abstentions will tell us whether the government is going to be able to force through these incredibly controversial plans, or whether he's going to have to bow to his backbenches and curb some of the plans that David Lammy has announced.
So jeopardy delayed, potentially. You have got some breaking news, I believe, on the Peter Mandelson files.
That's right. So this is tricky to date, more tricky news coming for Keir Starmer tomorrow. The government, if you remember, was forced by the Tories to disclose a huge amount of documentation relating to the appointment of Peter Mandelson in December 2024 to the position of US Ambassador to Washington. That documentation, Ali, is coming tomorrow, probably early tomorrow afternoon. After Prime Minister's questions, Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, will stand up in the House of Commons and announce that this is coming. And I think pretty much when he sits down, springing into life on the gov.uk website will be hundreds of documents related to Peter Mandelson appearing. Chasing very quickly after that will be me with the big screen next door and a whole load of other journalists and interested parties pouring through it. What are we going to get? Well, important to say some of the most contentious stuff related to the police investigation, well, that will be held back. The police are investigating Peter Mandelson over leaked documents. Peter Mandelson denies that he leaked confidential documents in breach of the law. But I also think that we will get potentially stuff that talks about, maybe even in unflattering terms, the special relationship with Donald Trump. It gets internal documents disclosing the government's private state of mind relating to sensitive diplomatic matters. Look, Ali, nobody's documents, nobody's internal documents, when placed in the public domain, ever finds them that flattering. We're not, as far as I know, going to get WhatsApp messages tomorrow, the private communications that really would, I think, blow things apart. But even private emails, I think, run the risk of creating difficulty, further difficulty in the UK's relationship with Donald Trump at this already perilous moment. They risk revealing internal sensitive things. Different factions in government might be further revealed into the light. And generally, there's a reason why a lot of government internal government correspondence is pretty confidential. And I think we're going to be reminded of why tomorrow. And none of this will help Keir Starmer reset his government.
OK, Sam, thank you. Just keeping an eye still on what is going on in the House of Commons, where we are expecting a vote to happen shortly, and we will obviously give you the numbers as soon as we can as that bill makes its way through Parliament. Sam, let's bring you back in. You were saying we're not expecting the rebellion to be as big as perhaps previously had been thought. It was quite emotional at times. It was certainly really powerful listening to what MPs were saying in the Commons today. That's
right. Numerically, the number of Labour MPs voting against today may only be in the 20 to 30 margin. I'm not saying that this rebellion isn't serious and serious enough to defeat the government should they choose to do so. We're simply in a game of tactics about how best rebels combined with opposition MPs, which tactic they will use in order to defeat and make the government pull back from these plans on jury trials. Because a little bit later down the parliamentary process, you can always pick off individual elements of a larger piece of legislation. And I think that's what they're planning to do. Look, I think this is a very emotive issue. The fact for Labour that it wasn't in the manifesto makes it all that much harder. Keir Starmer has got behind the case that David Lammy has made, that this is a necessary change to make in order to basically reduce the backlog. The issue is it's not quite clear that the evidence base is as robust as ministers might portray. I've been going through the government's own evidence, what's known as an impact assessment. In some of the government documentation does make clear that further work is wanted but not delivered. There are questions about whether magistrates actually deliver fair verdicts. 40% of magistrates' cases taken to appeal are partially or totally overturned. 4 out of 10 magistrates' verdicts that are appealed are thrown out. That's quite a statistic, and we want more magistrates' courses, more magistrates hearing cases. So that's quite an important statistic. But then we get to the question of what do the public think? Are the public broadly behind this, even if it wasn't in the manifesto? And I want you to look at the screen now behind me. I might just jump up and take you through a little bit of polling that we've got. So we've got the question of whether or not there is support for more magistrates to be able to oversee cases that have potentially a bigger prison sentence, extending the amount of prison sentence that could be handed down by a magistrate to 18 months. And look, 66% of the public actually say this should be done. So
on the basis of this, pretty broad backing for the Prime Minister and the Justice Secretary. Let's look at how that breaks down by party, if we could do that. So 66% overall. Actually, look at this. Reform UK voters like it the most. Labour voters like it pretty much in proportion. Tory voters back it as well, which is quite interesting. We'll hear from some Tories in a moment. They're dead set against this plan, but Tory voters, certainly from the 2024 election, quite like it. Greens quite like it, and so do Lib Dem. So that's one big. Let's look at a slightly more contentious bit of the plan. Now, this is asking the question, who supports removing jury trials for crimes with sentences up to 5 years and replacing them with a judge-led process? Well, actually, overall, there's a narrow support. This is the net figure, so this is the supporters minus the people who object. 4%, so just about a positive number support it. Quite a lot of Labour folk think that it's a good idea, but look at this. Reform voters, they're dead against. Tories are for it, and then pretty much even Stevens for the Lib Dems and the Greens. So there you have the sort of broad brush of public opinion. You know, politics is pretty against this. You've got a large array of opposition parties and potentially a critical mass of Labour MPs either abstaining or voting against. We'll find out how close we are to the critical number in the next 10 minutes or so. But the public, by and large, they're not that against, and passions are really high. I've outlined the case against. It's important to say there were 40 female Labour MPs who were backing this measure in order to see justice done. I think nobody likes seeing witnesses, even defendants. It is unfair on all parties in a court case that justice is delayed and delayed and delayed. I spent time in Snaresborough Court, and you just saw how justice was creaking and endlessly put back because of the lack of resource and the lack of lawyers and magistrates and judges. Everybody wants to sort this out. The government sincerely think that this is the best idea. The rebels sincerely think this is a bad route to go down and does curtail ancient freedoms. We'll find out a bit more about whether they're going to get this through in the next hour or so. OK,
really interesting polling there, Sam. I should say that we have just seen that Tory amendment be defeated. We're now waiting on the overall bill. We will find out if it has passed, which we expect it will very shortly, and we'll give you those numbers. But let's bring in our panel for tonight, shall we? The former Conservative Special Advisor, James Starkey, and Ellie Chowns, the Group Leader of the Green Party in the House of Commons. Let's bring you in on this. Both your parties, I believe, are against this bill, or certainly against juries being removed. Ellie, what is your take on what we're seeing unfold in the Commons? Do you think there will be a bigger rebellion further down the line?
I think it's really clear that there's concern across the political spectrum, including among Labour backbenchers, as we've heard about these proposals, and in the general public as well. You know, jury trial is an ancient right. It's part of the wider democracy of our justice system, and many people, including victims of crime and including literally thousands of lawyers and so many MPs, are deeply concerned about the way that the very real problems in our justice system have been a false solution, so-called solution, has been proposed to them, which undermines these ancient rights to jury trial, and which people who really know about this say, actually, it's really not going to address the fundamental problem. You know, there are much easier, quicker ways to address the problems that we do see, the court backlogs, and that is improving investment and improving productivity. As Sam said, you know, we've seen declines in the functioning of the court system for at least 10 years. If we got back to the level of productivity that we had 10 years ago, there would be really significant improvements. And that isn't just to do with COVID, it is to do with the squeezing of the funding that's gone into the justice system for a very long time. It's to do with courts that are literally crumbling around the ears of the people who are working in them. And fundamentally, the propositions that the government are making are not going to deal with all of those issues. I
suppose, is this also about, you know, the realities of government choosing practical choices?
My point...
Sorry, moving on to James.
I mean, the points I would make is, one, I think this is an issue. You can look at the polling, but as kind of Ellie's touched upon, this is about doing the right thing. This is much more important than where, you know, kind of just looking at the polling and where the public are on this. This is an ancient right. And related to that, you have to look ahead. So it's easy to, you can see the numbers, you can see that this is unpopular with reform voters and so on. But what is going to happen is that judge-led cases are going to lead to certain convictions that people like Nigel Farage are going to stand up and say, this is because Labour's denying jury trials. So I think the snapshot of polling, it's always tricky to look at it and say, it's not static. It will change, and it will change depending on some of the cases that we see come before it. But I really think this is one of those issues that, and we've saw passionate arguments on both sides. So this is not to say that, that I think there are genuine views on both sides about how do we see justice more quickly served to people in very difficult situations, and as Sam said, that's defendants as well. But I think it's something that you have to take the fundamentally right decision, because this is people's lives, people's experiences that they go through. And so I don't think it's something that you just have to look at the polling on. You have to look at what...
Yeah, and as you see, it's people's lives. We heard Charlotte Nichols, a Labour MP, talking about having PTSD because of how long she had to wait, more than 1,000 days to see her day in court. I mean, surely that is a really powerful argument.
But Charlotte Nichols' point was that she opposes what the government is proposing, that herself, as a victim of rape, speaking out for the first time today about the crime that she suffered and that has to come to court, and she is opposed to what the government is proposing today. So we all want to see huge increases in the efficiency and the productivity of the court system. MPs, all of us, hear heartbreaking stories from constituents who are having to wait absolutely unacceptable periods of time. But what we've got with these proposals from the government is it'll be effectively a halving of the number of jury trials, but only a tiny reduction in the amount of sitting times, because, of course, the most complex ones that will still go to jury trial, and at the cost of a real undermining of public trust in the justice system, a huge amount of political hoo-ha, and, of course, there are other things that the government can and should be doing immediately, not least investing more in the court system that would be much quicker and much more publicly acceptable and not undermine those fundamental rights.
Sam, do you want to come in there?
Talking about Charlotte Nichols there. Let's hear from her.
We have been told that if we have concerns about this bill, it is because we have not been raped or because we don't care enough for rape victims. The opposite is true in my case. It is because I have been raped that I'm as passionate as I am about what it means for a justice system to be truly victim-focused. It is because I have endured every indignity that our broken criminal justice system could mete out that I care what kind of reform will actually deliver justice for survivors and victims of crime more widely.
And you could hear, Ali, the emotion in her voice, completely understandably a matter of great sensitivity and personal importance to her. In the last few moments, we've had the numbers for the first vote. So what happens is that a Tory amendment is voted on before the main bill, and 203 MPs voted for the Tory amendment, 311 voted against. I just want to explain what that means. The critical figure is the number that voted against, and we think only Labour MPs will have voted against the Tory amendment. There are 404 Labour MPs, and 311 of them voted no. So there's a big question about where that 93 of them have gone, and some will be against the bill, some will be abstaining, some will just simply not be in the chamber, and that's the area that we're most focused on at the moment. At the end of the day, it was a Tory amendment, and the government are never going to agree with that. But let's hear from the Shadow Justice Secretary, Nick Timothy, who was making the Tory case about why they think the justice proposals and the plans to curb jury trials are the wrong ones.
The Justice Secretary says this is about efficiency and protecting the rule of law. But that is nonsense. According to the government's own impact assessment, reducing jury trials will cut the Crown Court workload by around 3.5%. But even that number, as I will explain, is wrong. According to the Institute for Government, this bill will reduce the Crown Court workload by only 1 or 2%. In other words, rape victims who are waiting for a year for their case to be heard at present would have their cases heard just 1 week earlier.
So the relatively new Shadow Justice Secretary, Nick Timothy, there, questioning the government's plans on the basis, essentially, of will they work? And there is some evidence in the government documents, as I was saying earlier, to suggest that the evidence base that the government have used is not the most robust. Look, we've got about 5 minutes to wait to find how the rebellion is doing. I can tell you, the figure that you just saw on screen, Nick Timothy, well, I think he is working together with rebel Labour MPs to work out the best tactics to try and stop these changes taking place. I know for a fact meetings have taken place with Nick Timothy and leading rebels and the opposition chief whip to game exactly how to defeat the government. All of this is going to come to a head, not tonight. We'll get a good idea of whether the government might lose tonight, but will come to a head properly after this bill's gone through a few more parliamentary stages, what's known as report stage, where you can pick off individual measures. I think that's when you might see the strength of the rebels. But that will happen.
Oh, hold on, I'm going to pause you there. Let's have a listen.
304. The noes to the left, 203.
That is a bit embarrassing.
The ayes to the right were 304, the noes to the left 203. So the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlocked.
OK, there we go, Sam. It has passed. The ayes 304, the noes 203.
OK, this is a much more significant result than I was initially expecting. Now, you're going to have to give us about 10 minutes to go through the numbers. The lists of how MPs voted or didn't vote are coming out very soon. But the thing that leaps out from the page is that 304 MPs voted in favour of this legislation. Now, I think I'm only aware of Labour MPs who are backing this. I don't think any member of an opposing party backs this. And there are 404 Labour MPs. So the question there is what happened to the rest of them? Now, there will be some rebels in that. Some people will have voted with the opposition, and I was speculating 20 to 30 before now. But clearly a lot of MPs, there are a lot more than 20 to 30 people not voting through the government lobby tonight. We want to know how many, why, and I think that there is an urgent job for the whips both to work out what happened and to be honest, explain. Because I think if there's a clear signal sent tonight from what happened in the division lobbies, then it's not clear what will happen with this. Just give us 10 minutes to work through it. The government, the Commons produced the voting lists pretty quickly. We'll bring you all of the information as we get it.
Yeah, it's tricky because we're talking about this right as it's happened, but analysis from our team suggests that 7 Labour MPs voted for the Tory amendment. That's quite interesting, isn't it?
That's quite something, and a sign of just how angry some people are. I don't think that'll be anything like the bulk of people who even voted against it. The lead rebel, Carl Turner, a Labour MP, veteran Labour MP, inherited John Prescott's seat.
Hopefully we're going to speak to him later.
Hope so too. He's a colourful character, as we're about to find out. He announced on social media that he would be abstaining today. So that doesn't put him in the category of voting against the legislation or voting for the Tory amendment. So that's quite a radical position that 7 Labour MPs have adopted. Not one that the Labour chief whip or number 10 would ever want to see, but there they are, they're going through the voting lobbies the wrong way. It's the first bit of massive legislation that Keir Starmer's tried to get through in quite a while.
And it's been a tricky few months.
And it's been a tricky few months. Let's see these numbers as they start spreading out very shortly.
OK, Sam, thank you so much. And our panel will come back to all of you very shortly. Well, we should say the Royal Navy destroyer HMS Dragon has today left port in the UK to head to the eastern Mediterranean to bolster British defences in the region. The Navy said she had undergone 6 weeks' work in just 6 days, but the Dragon's progress has become symbolic for opponents of the government's response to the crisis. Critics said the ship had been slow to leave following a drone attack which hit RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. Other European nations have already sent their own ships to the region. Well, here is our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes.
HMS Dragon has finally left Portsmouth a week after the Prime Minister announced that the UK would be sending a Type 45 destroyer to the Eastern Mediterranean to bolster defences of the sovereign bases in Cyprus and also of British interests across the Gulf. There's been a lot of criticism of the government as to why they didn't deploy one of these warships before the fighting started, given that they did forward deploy fighter jets to Cyprus, additional ones, and also to Qatar. And then there's been questions as to why HMS Dragon wasn't ready to go immediately as soon as the decision was taken. But the Ministry of Defence has pointed out that actually the scrambling of this warship to move as rapidly as it did was actually a pretty impressive feat. The ship itself, it's described as one of the most capable air defence warships in the world. It can fire, I think it's 8 missiles in under 10 seconds, and it can actually direct 16 of these missiles onto enemy targets at the same time. The Royal Navy says that it is actually capable of defending an area 5 times the size of Cyprus, which I'm sure will be a relief for people there once the ship finally arrives. It's going to take about 5 days to get to the region. And of course, there are questions as to whether the war will still be going on by then. And we've also heard today that a support ship called RFA Lyme Bay, which is off Gibraltar at the moment, that's being put on heightened readiness to deploy as well. That too, if the decision is taken to send it, could be sent to the Eastern Mediterranean, and it would be able to provide an option to help with evacuation operations, for example, should the situation in Lebanon deteriorate further. Now, that's just speculating. The support ship would have to most likely operate alongside HMS Dragon because it would need a warship to be able to protect it in hostile locations. And then finally, activity from the UK. We've been seeing B-1 bombers, American bombers, taking off from RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire today, and that comes after Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary of War, told a press conference that today is going to be the most intense day of the campaign of the operation in Iran. Obviously, we don't know the destination of these B-1 bombers, but we do know that the UK did belatedly give permission to the US to use RAF bases to launch bombing raids into Iran, provided they are defensive operations going against Iran's ballistic missile capabilities.
We'll return to the conflict in a moment. But first, Sam, we're getting a bit more information. We've been talking about the courts and tribunals bills passed in Parliament, but there have been quite a lot of Labour abstentions.
That's right. So we've got the detailed breakdown for the Tory amendment. So to decode that, this is where hardcore rebels on the Labour side shows how they will be behaving. 7 Labour MPs, as we said, voted for the Tory amendment. Now, I looked at their names. They're all on the left. They're the John McDonnells. They're the Richard Bergens. So they are, I think, Downing Street would say, the usual suspects. What is not usual is just how many Labour MPs appear to have abstained. 86 Labour MPs didn't vote. Now, again, we're at the really early stage of this, and there are 2 reasons why a Labour MP might not vote. One, because they can't, because they're busy, they're doing something else. It doesn't seem like the Labour whips are pushing people particularly hard to be there, but also conscientious objectors. People like Carl Turner, the lead rebel, who are deliberately abstaining, were telling people to abstain. And that number, I mean, it's bigger than I expected. We'll try and get a sense of which are in the first category, which the Whips won't be too worried about, because they never thought they were going to lose today's vote, and which are in the second category, which they will worry about. Those people will be objecting in large part to the retrenchment of jury trials and could come back and vote against the government when they're just voting on individual measures. If that is a substantial figure in the 50-60 region, then this legislation looks like it's really, really going to struggle to get through, particularly as the next bit of the fight, Ali, will take place after the May elections, when quite possibly, if the government don't win, Labour don't win in Scotland, Labour lose in Wales and have a drubbing all around the country, they will be in a politically weaker position, at which point Labour MPs will be like, why are we doing this difficult stuff? The government may not be able to muster quite so much as it can today to get stuff through. I mean, that figure, the 86%, 86 Labour MPs, did slightly make took my breath away. But let's see how this shakes down.
Yeah, as you say, significant number, still a lot to work out, but really, really interesting. Right, let's return to the conflict in Iran, shall we? A little earlier, I spoke to James Cartlidge, the Shadow Defence Secretary, about that HMS Dragon deployment. James Cartlidge, thanks so much for talking to us. So HMS Dragon is on its way. That's good news, surely?
It's really good news that she's finally set sail. Obviously, send my best wishes to the crew. We hope that she has a safe and swift journey out to the Eastern Mediterranean. And she's got a really important job to do. But my own view is she should have been out there weeks ago. If the Secretary of State thinks we need a destroyer there, why didn't we need one weeks ago? 6 weeks' work in 6 days. That's quite a feat. Yeah, it is extraordinary. I mean, I've been looking at some of the comments people have made, and a lot of people say, well, you know, you can't just click your fingers and you've suddenly got a destroyer ready to go. You need to load up the ammunition and all the rest of it. But the point is, weeks ago, they were making these decisions. So we know from John Healey's statement yesterday to the Commons that it was in January that they took the decisions to, for example, add air assets into the region, which is absolutely right, you know, more typhoons to Akrotiri and so on. But surely at that point they'd have worked out, as they have now, that they needed a destroyer. It seems extraordinary. Well, I suppose, you know, what the Defence Secretary says is that you're being an armchair general. Is the beauty of opposition that you can say these things, and you guys had your chance in government and defence spending was slashed? Well, first of all, these are operational decisions. I mean, this isn't about, you know, the size of the Navy. They could have sent a ship. I mean, we can debate till the cows come home what happened. I'm very proud of what we did in government. We took this extraordinary decision to arm the Ukrainians before Russia invaded. That was defence spending fell by 22% between 2010 and 2017. Yeah, so on 2010, if you want to debate 2010, Labour were going to cut it by 25%. And why? Because we got a note left by their own Chief Secretary. There's no money left. Britain was basically bankrupt. We were in a very serious situation financially, so cuts were inevitable. But I think that if we're honest, and I think we should all be, and I don't think Labour ministers do this enough, we've all done it. The armed forces have actually reduced pretty much since the Second World War, but particularly since the Cold War. They've gone from significant levels of spending every single year almost. The last time we spent 3% was under us. And I could say 4% under us, but the fact is, it's reduced every year. That was a long time ago. Yeah, but it's reduced every year, Ali, because people thought we had peace. Now that's been shattered, we all know we've got to spend more. Okay. And the thing is to be honest about that. Let's talk about what's actually going on in Iran. What do you think Donald Trump's objectives are? Well, I think the key thing for us as a party is the nuclear threat. And the President's been very clear that is ultimately the key target. Pete Hegseth said the enemy needs to be totally and decisively defeated. I mean, we are getting mixed messages out of the US. But decisively defeated because of the nuclear threat. I mean, I can't speak for the United States or their, you know, or the President or his Defence Secretary. Our view is that nuclear capability would be an extreme threat in the hands of a regime that murders its own people, especially thousands of them. You know, it's horrific what they've done. We don't want to have a nuclear weapon, so what are we going to do to stop it? Now, that's why I said weeks ago, if the President was to ask us as a country and we were hypothetically in government, we would have given permission for them to use our bases. But look, it has to be said, there is no easy answer to this. Because if you don't do this and they get a nuclear weapon, that's pretty serious for the world. It could be horrific, frankly, the potential if they do. Equally, if they act, well, you've seen what happens. There's risks to all the possible courses of action. Do you think it was legal for the US to start this war? Well, I'm not an international lawyer. But I know that under self-defence, if you as a leader, like the President of the United States, think that a country could threaten you or your allies with something as extreme as nuclear weapons... Hasn't that threat been there for 25 years, though? Well, I mean, they've obviously been holding negotiations. So, you know, the US have been speaking to the Iranians, and from what the envoy Witkoff said, it was apparently the Iranians boasted to them about the amount of enriched uranium. It's way above civil levels, that supposedly they said to them this could produce a dozen nuclear weapons. That's pretty serious. So presumably the United States concluded they weren't serious, they're going to keep doing it. So what happens next? So they've taken the course of action to address that. But it comes with risks. You know, I'm very open about that. Kemi has said, you know, even if it's the right thing to do and can be justified, there are clearly huge military risks with that. Kemi and the Shadow Attorney General have suggested that international law shouldn't stop us from doing what we think is right. Do you agree with that? I think the point that the Shadow Attorney General was making was that if international law can effectively stop nations from taking action so that a regime as wicked as one that murders thousands of its own people doesn't get its hands on a nuclear weapon, then you have to question it. But that doesn't mean, and he was clear in the long message he posted on X, that he still felt that there was a lawful case, and that's based in self-defence and collective
self-defence. I suppose, you know, if we can do what we think is right, does that mean that Russia can do what it thinks is right? You know, what message does it send to China looking at Taiwan? What message does it send to Russia if these rules are flexible?
Well, hold on, so Russia is a dictatorship that invaded a country on an unprovoked basis for entirely brutal ends, which is to conquer other territory. The United States is acting, whether one agrees with them or not, they are acting on the basis that they want to stop Iran from having nuclear weapons, because that would be a threat to the world. It would be a threat to allies. I think it would be a threat to ourselves. I think it's a very serious threat. But how you deal with that is not an easy question. And obviously military action carries risks as well.
I suppose what I'm saying is, isn't it a good thing, potentially, that Keir Starmer is taking international law really seriously? I mean, this was General Sir Richard Sheriff, former Deputy Supreme Allied leader of NATO, and he said we need to keep cool heads, as the Prime Minister is attempting to do, and think things through very, very carefully.
Well, I mean, it's not that cool ahead, is it? I mean, he's already U-turned on whether the US should use our air bases. I think that makes him look weak, if I may say.
OK, thank you so much, James Cartlidge.
You're welcome.
OK, let's return to the Commons vote on the Courts bill. As you can see, Sam Coates is here, and we're going to speak to Natalie Fleet, who backed that bill, very shortly. Sam, you've got some more numbers for us.
That's right. So we've got the breakdown of which Labour MPs didn't vote for it and how. 10 Labour MPs voted no, 90 Labour MPs abstained. Let me just break that down a bit further. The 10 Labour MPs who voted no, they really are all from the left, from the campaign group. They very much, I think, what would be the usual suspects. People who said they were in charge of the rebellion abstained, as we told you they were going to. That 90 figure will comprise of two types of Labour MPs, some who simply aren't here. There wasn't a particular effort by the whips to make people be here, so you could be off doing other business, and then another group of people who consciously abstained. It's hard to work out which is in which camp, but that 90 figure feels on the high side to me, but we've got to work out who was doing what. We'll see what happens.
Let's try and get an answer to that from Natalie Fleet, who's right here. So nearly 90 abstentions. That is a high number, isn't it?
It's not the rebellion that we were told that we would have, and this has been a tough slog getting here, and there have been so many very loud and very angry, very vocal people, and then there's been a quiet army just saying to the Minister and the Secretary of State, please do this, we need you to do this. So the Victims Commissioner wrote to every single MP and said, listen to victims, they need this to happen today. And then I was one of 40 women that wrote to David Lammy yesterday and said, victims' lives depend on us getting swift justice. I'm just so happy.
So what do you think the reasons are for those 89 abstentions then?
So there's lots of... I've been speaking to people and they've had different reasons. So some said we should put more money in the system. We're having record investment. There are other people that said, oh, you're being used as a victim. No, I genuinely feel like this is going to help victims everywhere. There were arguments around this as a class issue. I absolutely believe that it is a class issue. When I stood to speak today in the House of Commons, I was the second woman to be called. 5 barristers were called before me. Until I entered the Houses of Parliament, I hadn't met barristers in that kind of setting. It very much felt today like it was the establishment, the usual suspects in Parliament, the opposition, and the barrister and the lawyer lobby versus the defendants and the victims that really need justice to be far quicker than it is.
But then we did also hear from Charlotte Nichols, Labour MP, really powerful testimony talking about having PTSD from waiting so long, but she doesn't agree with the bill.
It was just, I just felt so proud to be sat in front of her. Just what a sister and what a very incredibly brave woman. She spoke about the things that she wasn't happy about, and rightly so. We're removing bad character witness today, and that's so huge. When you hear the testimony of what she went through and how she felt that she was on trial, today is all about rebalancing power between victims and perpetrators.
Sam, do you want to come in with a question?
I just got one thing, just in the way you talk about what we saw today, I think it's hard to say exactly where we're going to end up. Do you think that we're out of the woods with this legislation? Do you think it's pretty much destined to pass, judged on what you've seen today, or do you think that there's got to continue to be quite the fight to ensure it gets on the statute books and these changes actually happen?
This is so important to me. This is one of the most important pieces of legislation, so there's not going to be any complacency from me or anybody else around this. I will just continue to speak to any colleague that's concerned. But I think that what we've seen today, the contributions in the chamber, is that this backlog isn't okay. 200 women will be raped in this country today, and they won't have their trials won't be listed until 2030 at the earliest. Nobody thinks that's okay. So this is such an important piece of legislation.
Nobody thinks that that is okay, and I don't think nobody would disagree with that. I'm just trying to understand what we're learning from the vote that we've just had in the Commons. So again, do you think, from everything you saw today, that you're now pretty confident that this legislation is out of the woods, and when it comes back to the Commons at report stage, groups of MPs can pick off individual measures as they're threatening to do? I think that there is, or I am told there is, a decent chance that there could still be an important rebellion that changes the nature of what this government is trying to do. Do you agree with that, or do you think...
I definitely don't agree with it. From the very start, I was told, Natalie, why are you standing up for this? We are going to U-turn on it anyway. There will be a massive rebellion. There will be by-elections. And instead, I kept saying, I am standing up for this legislation because it is so important to me and the kind of country I want women to live in. The by-elections, the rebellions, they just haven't happened because instead we've had a dialogue around what is important to us, what do we want to get from this legislation. We will see it on the statute books.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for coming all the way from Parliament straight after that vote, and Sam. Let's bring our panel back in. James, how politically dangerous a moment is this potentially for the government now?
I think it is. I mean, as Sam says, we don't know the makeup of these numbers, but it does look quite sizable. I would be surprised if they don't come pretty close. I think the government tonight, the Whip's office, will be already starting to look at what they might need to give to head off some of the rebellions. Because there's enough people in there that suggests, if you've got 60, 70, that it's going to be a problem on amendments, when we get to them. Those things have a nature of their own. We'll see what Carl says in a second. They have a nature of their own. They can gather pace. So I think it's a smaller actual outright rebellion in terms of the people that have voted against the bill from the Labour side than we thought. Much bigger abstention. And when that happens, in my experience of being in government, you're immediately going to try and look ahead and see how do we head off amendments. And that's normally trying to work out to do a deal with someone like the gentleman you've got next to you.
Well, we will come to the gentleman I've got next to me in just a moment, but very quickly, Ellie, your reaction to the numbers that we've heard, 89 abstentions.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how the Labour whips react to this. Are they going to withdraw the whip from people who rebelled and voted in line with their conscience? Are we going to see a lot of negotiation and a lot of compromise making? Last time we had a really big Labour rebellion with the PIP bill. Then you saw effectively the bill was withdrawn, essentially, totally gutted, because Labour backbenchers did find their backbone and stand up for principles. Now, I could imagine a world in which this bill is significantly amended so that it maybe keeps the good bits that there's a reasonable degree of political consensus around, such as, for example, investing more in the court system and speeding things up, and getting rid of the bits that so many people across the entire political spectrum are so concerned about, defending that fundamental right to jury trial.
OK, thank you both. We will come back to you. And as if by magic, Carl Turner has appeared next to me. You have been leading the rebellion. You're talking about 67, I think it was, strong rebellion. You abstained. Have you mellowed in your position?
Absolutely, categorically, not one bit. My opposition to this is stronger than ever. I'm now confident that we have the numbers for amendment. I'm told by the Whip's office, an insider told me there was 20 slips. So 20 members of Parliament were given the nod not to be there. My maths isn't the best, but I think that's 89 abstentions, and the magic number is 80 on amendment. So I'm confident that the worst parts of this bill, the jury curtailment stuff, the magistrates' extra powers...
Would it not have sent a clearer message to vote against?
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, the reality is we did have people who voted against this evening. I'm clearly not the most impressive whip because I was promised that there'd be more abstentions. When I said I was going to abstain, I encouraged others to abstain. But some people, and I understand it, voted with the conscience. I think there were 7 who voted against the bill altogether. I commend them for that, but I think there was more value in abstentions because it keeps the government guessing. But they'll not be guessing this evening because they know that this bill is dead in terms of the bits that we don't like. That's just the reality. I'm a socialist, but I'm not going to be cracking the champagne open until we defeat the worst excesses of this bill. I'm confident, though, I promise you.
I can see Sam gagging to come in. Come on, Sam.
Because you're talking about numbers, and I just want to understand what you're saying. At second reading, 10 Labour MPs voted no, 90 Labour MPs abstained. When an MP abstains, for one of 2 reasons, either because they're not there, not necessarily that they had a view on the legislation, they were doing something else, or because they abstained, like you, on principle. How many people were in that second camp? How many Labour MPs chose tonight not to go through a voting lobby to signal that they are unhappy with the status quo? How many is it, do you think?
Well, yesterday evening, before I had a meeting with David Lammy, I was happy enough to tell him that I had 67 who were prepared to go into the division lobby today and vote against the government if I needed that. That allowed me to negotiate a position on the Public Bill Committee from one of the so-called rebels. As a result of that, David Lammy said he would speak to the Chief Whip. Within 5 minutes, I received a text message from David Lammy saying, "You've got what you need, please abstain. You can have a position on the Public Bill Committee." I suspect I'm not getting a position, but that's fine, I'm not bothered about that. As long as somebody does. But they'll be properly advised, they'll be properly briefed, and they will, I'm confident, speak to the worst excesses of this bill in committee, and then when it comes back for report stage, I think the amendments will succeed because I'm confident we have the numbers.
What did you expect the numbers to be?
I'd be honest with you, I thought it'd be less. I was expecting...
In terms of abstentions?
Yeah, I thought there'd be 50, if I'm honest with you. But I'm impressed that people were coming to me during the course of the debate and saying that they'd listened to the debate, they weren't convinced by the government, and in fact they decided to abstain. But at the point where they can change the bill, they'll definitely be with me and voting for
Sam's been looking at his computer.
One thing that Natalie Fleet was saying, and I don't think anyone disagrees, this has all got quite nasty. When we talked to you, when you talked to me in January, you talked about ministers being lazy in the way that they've approached this. Do you regret anything that you've said to date in the way that you have pursued this rebellion?
Yeah, I've said that. That interview we did, Sam, I said that Brian Leveson had done a lot of work. I didn't accuse David Lammy.
You said ministers were lazy.
Yeah, lazy in that they weren't prepared to look at the alternatives to the jury curtailment. I've always maintained that it's not necessary, but actually it's worse than not necessary. It simply will not work.
You said David Lammy has not done a lot of the work. Do you regret that?
I stand by that. I think David Lammy has done a lot of work in terms of negotiating with the Chancellor of the Exchequer £2.5 billion for the criminal justice system. But in terms of the work that needs to be done to deal with the backlog, I'm afraid the work hasn't been done. I can give David Lammy all of the alternatives, better than the alternatives that Sir Brian Leveson has proposed, if he's prepared to sit down and negotiate. Don't forget, Sam, David Lammy wasn't allowed to speak to me until about 3 weeks ago when Mr Mac Sweeney was marched out on number 10 Downing Street.
How would you
That's the truth.
How would you characterise your relationship with David Lammy right now?
Well, I think we're friendly again, just about, but we were close pals at one point. He was my boss as the Shadow Justice Secretary for a time, and we got on very well indeed. I think my relationship with David is fine. Look, I don't want to be disparaging or personal about colleagues. I don't say David Lammy himself is lazy, but I'm entitled to say They've not done enough work to understand the difficulties in the criminal justice system. The Bar Council, the Criminal Bar Association, the Law Society, judges
are you prepared
privately
for how damaging this is going to be for the government? This isn't just about cause, and it's about their authority.
I've got a relationship with Keir Starmer as well.
Yeah,
I've said to Keir Starmer, listen, Keir, this is going to end up as a problem. Let's not make the mistakes that you've made in the past. We're 18 months, just shy of 2 years into a Labour government, and we keep making mistakes. Why? Because they don't engage with the Parliamentary Labour Party. They think they've got a massive majority and they can do as they like. They cannot.
Final last question, if I may. Is there any chance of you resigning? You were threatening that in January. Could you resign your seat still?
That was about the fact that the Chief Whip was warning me about suspension and putting me on a conduct warning.
This was before then?
No, it wasn't. It was a conduct warning that he threatened me with and a suspension. And I said, be very careful about threatening MPs with suspension because MPs like me are cheesed off. And if it comes to the crunch, I'll walk out the door. That's what I said to the Chief Whip, and that's what I maintain. Stop thinking you can bully MPs. I've been in that place 16 years. I've voted against the Labour Party on one occasion. Just speak to us. We understand the things that are going on. We can help if they engage with us. We've been treated with utter contempt. I sent the Prime Minister a message a couple of days ago. I said, stop allowing people in the PLP, ministers and whips, treating MPs like me with complete contempt. And that's what's been happening.
OK. Carl Turner, thank you very much for that. We're going to have to leave it there and for sitting between me and Sam and taking questions from both sides. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Right, well, that is the very latest on the passage of the Courts Bill through Parliament. Let's bring our duo back in, James Starkey and Ellie Chowns. I want to also talk about Iran. Sorry, we've been flip-flopping between subjects today. What do you think of Kemi Badenoch's stance? I mean, we've seen her talking about arrows flying, wanting to shoot the archer, not the arrows, talking about Keir Starmer not acting quickly enough, being scared. Do you think she's had the right tone?
I mean, on the Keir Starmer point, he clearly didn't act quick enough. If you believe reports in The Spectator last week, I think it was, that Keir Starmer struggled to get through what he wanted to happen. Forget what Kemi Badenoch or Nigel Farage or the Green Party want. Keir Starmer couldn't get what the Prime Minister wanted to happen through his own Security Council. It took him 3 or 4 days for that to happen. That tells you a lot about where the Prime Minister is. That relates to where he is tonight with Carl Turner, who was just on, which is he's not really in control of his own party. He's struggling to get bills through Parliament with his own MPs, and he's struggling to get what he wants through with his own cabinet. So I think on the issue of this, wherever you stand on action, on, should we have joined with the US on these first strikes initially, or should we have stayed out of things? I think a lot of it speaks to his indecision, which is a perception that he's got, and his political reality. Ellie's party in the upcoming, if you look at some of the projections for London, are projected to take hundreds of seats. What happens when you have that is Labour MPs will go to their seats, they'll campaign with local councillors, they'll be knocking on doors, and they'll hear people who've been voting for Labour for years, and they'll say to them, I'm voting Greens next time. And this will be one of the things they cited. So I think these are all things that are symbolic of where Keir Starmer and the Labour Party find themselves.
Do you think your position on Iran got the public backing?
Absolutely. I do think the Green Party's position on Iran has the public backing. And, your original question about Kemi Badenoch's position, I think she's completely out of touch with public opinion on this. What we have seen is illegal action on the parts of the US and Israel, completely outside international law, very reckless, very irresponsible, huge ramifications in the region and, of course, globally. And people are feeling that literally in their pockets in the middle of a cost of living crisis, fuel prices going up through the roof because of illegal international aggression on the part of the US and Israel. Now, for Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage to be saying somehow, oh, bring it on, let's get involved, let's do more of that, that's completely irresponsible. irresponsible.
I suppose, is the Greens seen as a party of defence? You know, is this the moment to be getting rid of our nuclear deterrent, as you would?
At this point, the Green position in relation to Iran is the responsible position and is totally in line with the position of the general public. People here are really worried about this irresponsible approach by Donald Trump. As the Green Party spokesperson on foreign affairs, I have been calling on Keir Starmer for way more than a year now to show a bit of backbone and stand up to Donald Trump, stand up for British values. Now, the commitment to international law is fundamental to that. I tabled a bill last week in Parliament to put in place something that Keir Starmer himself said a few years ago he wanted, namely that if there is to be any UK involvement in military action, we need three things. We need a legal justification, we need a clear aim for that action, and we need a Commons vote. Now, none of those things are in place. And as for Donald Trump's war aims, I mean, he's literally listed about 10 different ones in the past 7 days. You know, it is really extraordinary that leaders of UK political parties could be somehow suggesting that they would be gung-ho and would be following in on Donald Trump's coattails in such an irresponsible way. It is absolutely time for de-escalation. Every effort has to be put into that.
And briefly on that, is Donald Trump, is the Reform are seen as closely allied to Donald Trump? Is that going to harm them?
Potentially. I mean, I think one thing I'll say is I won't take lectures on a party who wants to leave NATO. And also, I mean, it's what Zapolansky's been talking about. And also, certainly are raising big questions about it. And also, the difference is with the Conservative Party is I think you have to put a country's interests before you go asking what lawyers think. And so,
no, it's in British interest to de-escalate, not to follow on Trump's coattails. The
but
idea
I think the thing is, I think leaders need to spend less time in room with lawyers and focus more on what is in the country's interest.
My point is that upholding international law is in the interests of Britain.
So what's been going on? So when Iran's been arming terrorists, what have the international lawyers been doing about that?
We absolutely oppose
Iranian what's been done about that?
Well, sanctions.
Where are the lawyers?
Sanctions, for example, efforts
to
de-escalate. But do you genuinely think that the Trump and Netanyahu action is making the world a safer place?
Okay, I'm sorry. We are going to have to. We can continue this off air. We know that your parties have very different positions. Right, let's return to Sam. We've covered a lot this evening, but tomorrow is going to be a big day.
That's right. What links today and tomorrow is the question, can Keir Starmer command a majority in the Commons? What's about to happen tomorrow is because he couldn't on the matter of disclosing files about Peter Mandelson. The Tories wanted disclosure. Keir Starmer couldn't stand in his way, and so now it happens. God knows what we'll see, other than hundreds of documents emerging on the government website after lunch, emails about the appointment of Peter Mandelson, the kind of stuff that no government would want in the public domain, didn't want it for a reason. All I'll say is watch Sky News. We'll be there. I'll be there with the big screen. Follow it live.
At 7 o'clock, in particular, on the Politics
Hub.
Right, thank you so much. Sam, Ellie, James, our panel. That's it from us tonight. I will be back tomorrow at 7 o'clock with all the latest on those files that we expect tomorrow. Up next, it is UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee, where we will have more comprehensive coverage of what is going on in Iran as the war continues, and of course at 9 o'clock on The World Tonight. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you tomorrow.